Well, welcome to the 9/11 Tribute Center presentation of We Were There. My name is Judith Pucci. I'm a Tribute Center walking tour guide. This afternoon, you're going to hear stories told to you by two of my fellow guides. These stories, they go beyond the big historic events of that day, the events that changed the way we all live, and they focus instead on the personal costs of September 11th. So next to me are Greg Hansen and Maria Malone Hodges. Maria worked for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and she did that for 30 years. The Port Authority is the organization that manages and oversaw the construction of the first World Trade Center. That was built back in the 1970s. The Port Authority is also overseeing the construction that's going on outside now, which is the Second World Trade Center. In addition to the Trade Center, the Port Authority is responsible for overseeing the management of many of New York's bridges, tunnels, our seaports and airports. They had their offices in the upper half of the North Tower. They were actually between the 61st and the 72nd floor. Now, the North Tower was the first building that was attacked that morning. As for Greg, Greg is a New York City firefighter. He is a battalion chief, and he was special events coordinator for the fire department as well. On September 11th, he was a lieutenant with the Engine Company 24, which is located in Greenwich Village. Greg has been with the fire department for almost 25 years. We're going to begin, though, with Maria's story. So let me just very briefly, I'll set the scene for you, and then Maria will tell you about her experience that day. Maria's office was on the 64th floor of the North Tower. So she was in the upper half of that building. Actually, for her that day, the fact that she was on the 64th floor, when the attacks began, it really didn't matter because she was just entering the building. So the plane hits, she's on the street level, she stays there, she helps to evacuate people, bring them to safety, and since then she has done an enormous amount to support and help people who were affected by September 11th. So Maria, it's all yours.
Thank you, Judith. On September 11th, I began a journey that I never really expected to go on. As Judith mentioned, my office was on the 64th floor of the North Tower, and I was a customer relations manager for the Port Authority. However, the journey I want to tell you about today begins when I get home. And I got home in the evening, and I had good information on all my staff except for 3 people. These 3 people were all new to our organization, to my organization. They were bright, the best in customer service you could ask for. They were really, really good. And we were working on a great career path for them. But I desperately needed to find them. I needed to know if they were okay. Everyone else I knew was okay. So I went up to my bedroom, I got my contact list. I stared at it, and I stared at it, and I stared at it. And there was one phone call I really, really did not want to make. And that was to the newest member of our staff, who was a young man whose wife was 9 months pregnant. So I said, okay. I went downstairs and, believe it or not, poured myself a glass of wine, took 3 sips, and dialed the phone. And I didn't know what I was going to say, but I just needed to find out if he was okay. And his wife did answer the phone. I just blurted out, "Have you heard from Michael?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you, God," and he's okay. So that phone call, what I thought was the most difficult phone call to make, was out of the way. I then proceeded to call the 2 other people whose names were Nancy and Arlene. And once again, I called repeatedly to Arlene's house. I finally got through to her 18-year-old son, who said he was waiting for word from the authorities. So, okay, I knew that status. Then I proceeded to call Nancy. Nancy lived alone in Secaucus, New Jersey, and I called her house. I left messages on her machine so many times I probably broke it. But I knew that her sisters and her parents lived nearby. And I knew that if I kept leaving messages, one of them would get that message and call me. And they did. One of the sisters did call me the following morning. The next day, these families, what they were doing is were canvassing all the hospitals. They were looking for their loved one. They were putting out There's missing posters. They were distributing that anywhere, any place that they could think of. And we did talk during the day, and we all decided collectively that they were fine. Everything was going to be fine. We had a lot of hope. And what we all decided collectively is that they didn't have their ID when they left the building, or they had amnesia. And then later on, I decided to myself, we probably saw too many soap operas. But anyway, this is what we decided. They were fine, and no one knew who they were. So that was September 12th. And I stayed in touch with them throughout the evening. September 13th, Thursday, 2 days later, I was in my office, my makeshift office, very, very early in the morning. My director called me and said, come to my office, please. I said, okay, this is great. I know what's happened. They found him. He's going to have the details because he's the boss. So I ran out of my office like a crazy woman. I flew down the stairs, didn't use the elevator, flew down the stairs. My feet didn't even touch the steps. I ran into his office, and I walked in, and he said, sit down. And I said that my fantasy was now over. I realized that my fantasy was now over. So we discussed what was going on, and they hadn't found any live person in the rubble since the day before. So our department and our agency decided that we were basically going from rescue to recovery, civilian style. And so I had to process that. I did not tell Nancy and Arlene's family, by the way, that we had done that we had changed our mindset of how we were going to approach things. So that was that. And so weeks go on, months go on. I'm still in contact with their families. We talk every day, every other day. We're always in touch. And our conversation is always about one thing. When are they going to find Arlene? When are they going to find Nancy? Why can't they find him? Are they going to find him? We always talked about the same thing. And I could sense that the families were losing hope, as was I, to be honest with you. So then, on December 24th, Christmas Eve, fully 3.5 months after 9/11, the medical examiner's office identified Arlene and her remains. And her family could then bury her for something that they were truly appreciative, they were very grateful for. And finding of Arlene's remains really re-energized Nancy's family, that they were going to find Nancy, because Nancy and Arlene were standing right next to each other when the building collapsed. So they were very courageous. Both these families were extremely courageous during this time, but Nancy's family was really re-energized. And they said, and we continued to have our conversations, but now it was more like, well, why can't they find Nancy? She was standing right next to Arlene. Are they going to find her? When are they going to find her? And I had no answers, but I was the sympathetic person on the other end of the phone. I didn't have any answers. We just talked. And that was the basis of our relationship, was talking. So anyway, 1 month passed. There's no remains for Nancy. The second month begins. There are no remains for Nancy. And it was getting a little depressing, actually. Then, in the middle of February, the medical examiner's office identified Nancy. And so what we did is we convened a notification team from the Port Authority, my agency, and that consisted of a police inspector, a doctor from our medical services department, and me. We made our way up to Union City, New Jersey, to her parents' house. Her parents met us at the door, and we went into the living room. We sat down. The police inspector then gave them the details, the official details of the recovery. And so then there also, the police inspector had a bag with him. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't question what police inspectors are doing. I don't know what's in the bag. Anyway, so he gives the official details, and then, and the family's there, his sister, the parents, and everything are there. And then the police inspector opens the bag. And believe it or not, he pulls out Nancy's singed but intact pocketbook. And we were speechless. We were absolutely breathless. We could not believe this. And so it was just remarkable. And Nancy's family, much like Arlene's family, was very, very grateful that they now had something to bury. They now had their Nancy back, and they could bring her home. So we were doing all that, and the family was also absolutely, totally amazed that they had her pocketbook. They just couldn't believe they had their Nancy back in her pocketbook as well. Well, anyway, as I said, the base of our relationship was talking on the phone. And so months passed, we continued talking on the phone about a variety of things. Well, those months have turned into years. And, so we continue to talk. As a matter of fact, we talk so much that the phone battery goes dead and you have to go get another one. We just talk we talk about anything and everything, we just talk. We also came up with our own tradition. We always go to the 9/11 service that the Port Authority has at St. Peter's Church, which is right around the corner from here. And we always go to the service, and then we usually go out for something to eat. On the 10th anniversary, however, that was when the Memorial Plaza opened, and it was for families only. So I said, after our service, I said, well, I'll wait outside. After you go have your visit, and then we can go then and have our meal as we usually do. And they said, oh, no, you're coming. And I said, I can't come. I'm not a member of the family. And they said, oh, no, you're coming. You're our sister-in-law, you're our cousin. And so it started out as a purely professional relationship with their families, and now I'm part of the family. Thank you.
Maria told you about two particular people that she worked with, but it turned out that 84 of her colleagues in the Port Authority were killed that morning. They are among the nearly 3,000 people killed on September 11th. But there's another number, and this is one that many people are not aware of, and it's 20,000. That is just about the number of people, that's an approximation of the number of people who safely evacuated the World Trade Center that day. About 20,000. It was an extraordinary rescue effort, and Greg was part of that. For firefighters, a lot of people don't realize this because so many firefighters died that day, and there were so many of them here so quickly. This is the reason why. For the fire department, when the first attack took place, the night shift was ending and the day shift was beginning. So there was this overlap. That meant that when the word got out in terms of what was happening down here, there were hundreds of firefighters in firehouses throughout the city. And whether they should have been going home or coming in for work, they all came down here. And Greg was one of them. It's all yours.
After September 11th, I can remember my brother putting his arm on, and he told me, Greg, it's just not your time. Others have told me I was just extremely lucky. And certainly for a lot of people that survived that day, they think that some type of divine intervention may have played a role. And others believe it was just random luck. And I don't have the answer to that question. But I do know this, that a lot of people that lived and died that day, there was some sort of twist of fate. What plane you got on, what tower you might have been in. Maybe you missed the bus that day. Maybe you stopped for a cup of coffee. Maybe you boarded an elevator, or maybe you left somebody else on. On September 11th, I would have a number of twists of fate myself. I was lieutenant in Engine Company 24, which is located in Greenwich Village, about 20 blocks north of here. And on that morning, when I came in, I had received a phone call. And it was right about 8:46, 8:47, right after the plane had hit the North Tower, and on the phone was my wife, who worked about 10 blocks north of here. And she told me a plane had just hit the North Tower. And with that, the alarm came off, and I got on the rig with my 5 men, and off we went. And we came down the street, and we could see a big hole in the tower. And at the time, we just thought it might have been a small plane. And when we arrived, we got off, and we went into the North Tower. And the lobby glass had already been broken out. And some of the elevators Looked like someone had thrown a grenade into them. And there were some dead bodies in the lobby. And I went over to the command post to try to get my orders, and I found out that none of the elevators in the North Tower were working. And within a few minutes, the chiefs ordered us to climb up, and off we went. As we went up the stairs, it was very orderly. A lot of people were coming down, and we were asking them, what floors they were on. And we were going up single file, and they were coming down single file. And I eventually found out from someone that they had come from the 90th floor, and they had seen fire. So we knew we had a very long climb to go. Eventually, we got to the 27th floor, and my men stopped briefly. And they had stopped because there were 2 civilians still on the 27th floor. One of them was a paraplegic, a very heavy-set man confined to a wheelchair. And he was with his friend. And they could not exit because they had no elevator. I did not want to abandon them, so I took one of my men. I told him, you stay here with them, and hopefully you can get some additional help, and you start them down. And the rest of us continued on our way. And we got up to the 35th floor when we saw that there was a little bit of a staging area. There were already 3 companies up there, so we stopped. We were sweating profusely. We were extremely tired. It was a very difficult climb to that height. We were there for maybe a couple of minutes, and there was a chief on that floor, and the chief was on a different radio channel than I was on. And over his radio came, "Mayday, get out of the building." Now, it seemed very strange because nothing was going on the 35th floor, but a mayday for the fire department is a distress signal. And when followed by the words, "get out of the building," usually means that there's going to be an imminent collapse. Now, it didn't really make sense to us. So normally you would want to drop everything and run out of there. But calmly we got up and we started to exit. We figured something up higher was happening that we didn't know about. And as we started for the staircase, all of a sudden the North Tower started to shake violently. And it was simply like an earthquake. And we had no idea what the heck was going on. We looked at each other, we were shocked. And about 10 seconds later, it just stopped. And what had just happened, and we didn't know it, was that the South Tower had just fallen. And when it fell, it killed everybody that was in the South Tower at that moment. We gathered in the staircase. I saw that I had all my men. And with those 2 pieces of information, the Mayday and the building shaking violently, I knew being in the building was not safe. And all I wanted to do was get out. So me and my men started down. And when we got to 27th, I remembered I had left one of my firefighters there. And I said, let's get off, let's see if he's still here. I was hoping that he had already started descending. But when I got into the hallway, down by the elevator, there he was with those 2 civilians. As I walked down to the hallway, all of a sudden, another firefighter came out. And he was a captain. His name was Billy Burke. And as we approached, he and I started talking and trying to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to get these guys out. And there was an elevator there, and the doors were open. And I remember turning to Captain Burke, and I said, I'm not putting my men in an elevator. I said, I saw what happened already. I said, the building was shaking violently. I said, I think we're going to have to just carry them down. And with that, I turned back to the stairway. And as I got to the stairway, I turned around, and my men were there, but Captain Burke and the 2 civilians were not. And one of my firefighters said he had gone down. Captain Burke was going to take responsibility for them with his company and went to the other staircase. So I wasn't going to hang around and argue with Captain Burke. I thought they were my responsibility, but I said, all right, he's taking them. That burden has been lifted from my shoulders. Let's continue down. And off we went. Eventually, we would get down to the 3rd floor. And at the 3rd floor, our stairway was blocked. And there was another firefighter in there that I did not know, and he was requesting some help. And he had another civilian who could not walk, another heavy-set gentleman. and he was lying on the ground in the hallway. And at this point, I was getting a little frustrated because we were getting delayed to get out of this building. So we got him up in a chair and we rolled him to the next staircase. And when we got in the staircase, we started to carry him down, and the chair just broke underneath his weight. And at that point, there was some police officers in there from the Port Authority, and I says, you guys grab his legs, we'll grab his arms, and we dragged him down the staircase into the lobby. What I didn't know is that right before we got to that staircase, that stairway was also blocked, and that two police officers and a firefighter had stayed behind in the lobby and were forcing that door open, allowing us to get out of the staircase. When we got into the lobby, some other police officers led us to the north exit. And as we got there, they said, hold up, people are jumping from the building. And that was my first indication that people were jumping. Eventually they said, go. And off we went. And when I got out of the building, I said, okay, finally, we are safe. We're out of this building. And I took my mask, which has all my air in it, and I dropped it on the ground. I said, okay, we're out. Right? And as we walked, it was very eerie, because what had been a beautiful sunlit day was now just a complete whiteout, almost like you were walking in a blizzard. And there was debris around. Nothing huge or anything, but it was just very strange. And I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And we walked another few feet, and we were just feet from the North Tower, and then all of a sudden this large roar came. And my first thought was that another plane was coming in. And then it went completely black. And then I felt this incredible shock wave behind me. And so my next interpretation was that I thought there had been an explosion. And I thought for sure at this point that fire would be behind this shock wave. And at that moment, I was certain, 100%, that my life was over. And the only thing I could think was, that I prayed, was that God take me quick and make it painless. At that same moment, or around that same time, my wife, who had called me, working 10 blocks north, had been in a taxi with a bunch of strangers, and she was trying to head north, and there was a lot of traffic trying to get out of downtown area. And as they were heading north, they heard on the radio, the North Tower has just collapsed. And with that, she blurted out, my husband's dead. Mm-hmm. And then the strangers held her hand, and they prayed with her that I would live. And I thought that was interesting, that here I was praying for a quick death. At the same time, some strangers did not know me was praying for my life. I got into the fetal position next to the Custom House, World Trade Center number 6. And at this point, I was getting pulverized by small chunks of concrete. It felt like rocks, but it was constant. But in about 10 or 11 seconds, it was over. And at that point, it was still pitch black, and now there was this thick smoke, right? And it was just entering my lungs, like as if someone had stuck a sock down my throat. And I thought at that point, I'm like, you're an idiot. You just dropped your mask about 30 feet behind you. I said, you survived whatever that was, and now you're going to suffocate. But at that moment, I saw in the distance there was a light. And there were 2 police officers on a staircase that led from the courtyard down into the street. And that's that survivor staircase that you'll see in the museum. I crawled on my belly. There were pockets of fire all over the place. And I got to that staircase, and head first I went down. And finally I was in the street. Now, I had exited with about 15 people at that time, and now there was nobody around. But finally I was out, and it was over. And in the course of the rest of the evening, I would locate each of my men, and all my men from Engine 24 had survived. We were obviously incredibly lucky. Captain Burke had appeared on the 27th floor and taken away a difficult rescue. There were police officers that opened a stairway that allowed us to exit, and others allowed us out the north exit. And the custom house that I was underneath, that had been split in two, somehow was still standing above me. Maybe Engine 24 had a miracle. Maybe. But on the 35th floor, those rest of those firefighters from those other three companies, none of them would survive. There'd be no miracle for them. And some of those officers that forced that doorway, and some of them that led us out the right way, they too would die. And as for Captain Billy Burke and those two civilians, there'd be no miracle for them on the 27th floor. Thank you.
That is one powerful inside perspective on that day. I'm going to give you one more number. It's a day of breathtaking numbers. Here's another one. 343. That is the total number of New York City firefighters who were killed that morning. 343. They were not alone. 23 New York City police officers dead. 37 Port Authority police dead. September 11th stands as the worst loss of first responders in a single event in United States history. The story, though, doesn't end there with Greg, because he has just returned to Engine Company 24 in Greenwich Village as their battalion chief. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your stories. It was a generous thing to do. I would like to thank all of you also for being here. If you have enjoyed these stories, I invite you to please take one of our tribute tours. You can hear more of our stories. They're given every day throughout the day. So on behalf of Tribute, on behalf of Greg and Maria and myself, thank you for choosing to spend some of your time with us.